So call Maria, her show is killer. You won't believe it, darling.
Welcome to the Maria Sanchez Show right here on KADYTV.com, and we are live. So if you're watching us, thank you so much. We really appreciate your eyes. If you're watching us later, that's okay too. We just want you to watch because that's what we're about. If you don't watch, then we're just all alone by ourselves, and maybe with staff and
Which
guests.
is pleasant nonetheless.
But still, it's better if you're in on the party. So we're live every day at 4 o'clock. Monday through Friday, and then as the needs exist. And as I mentioned, we're going to be live from the Government Center on Tuesday, November 2nd at 8 o'clock till midnight doing election results and returns, obviously for the County of Ventura, and then of course the state and then national elections that might be interesting to cover. And then we go where the news is, so there's all kinds of things that we do. In fact, we have a visit at the Reagan Library next month, both with Mike Huckabee and then with President George W. Bush. So we'll be simulcasting that because the Reagan Library has designated us as their broadcast outlet, which of course we're very honored to be. So if you're a California voter, you need to listen up. And we spoke last week with Scott Harris. Scott is the proprietor, owner of Mustang Marketing, and Scott is also an amazing political wonk, and just really
Amazing political wonk. I like that.
And he is all three. So, and then all three strung together. Scott really has a great grasp and understanding of the issues, and the only thing that we do try to do here is try to be as unbiased, objective, and nonpartisan as possible. You can get opinions on other channels. What our adage is knowledge is power, and if you have the information, then you can make your own decision, and hopefully it'll be more informed because you have the information. Now, we did 5 propositions last week?
We did. We
Okay.
did 5. We did 19, 20, 21, 22, and then we skipped ahead and did 27 as well.
So we're finishing up the other today, and we're going to tease you because 23 is probably the one that's the most interesting, so we're going to hold back.
It's the most controversial outside of 19, which we did last week.
Right, medical marijuana. So we're going to start with 24. Scott's going to read it as it's written, and then we'll go into some of the facts.
And I'm reading the short version, by the way. If you want the long version, of course, you can get it with your little voter pamphlets, but the short version is this. Prop 24 repeals recent legislation that would allow businesses to lower their tax liability. Now, what I try to do is go through and look at the LAO, the Legislative Analyst's Office, and what they do, because they're pretty good at doing a non-biased job. So 2 key points on that. Number 1 is that it repeals recent legislation that allows businesses to shift operating losses to prior tax years. And number 2, it repeals recent legislation that allows corporations to share tax credits with affiliate corporations. So if we have an umbrella corporation and the Harris division or the Harris Corporation underneath that has some tax credits, and I don't need them, I could shift it to the Sanchez Corporation as long as we all have the same parent. And this would repeal that. That is the goal of this legislation.
So the real goal, though, is to save money for the state.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, depending on what side of the political fence, it's either a tax increase, meaning that these benefits are already out there for corporations, so taking them away is a tax increase, or it's simply closing up loopholes that shouldn't have existed in the first place, much like on the federal level, the Bush tax credits. The people who want them to continue say they must continue, that's what we put in place. People who don't want them to continue say, no, that's a loophole, we need to close it up and tighten it up. This is the same thing, except it's for corporations in the state of California. And it's not going to be a surprise, but what we're going to find is one group is stacked up against it and one group is stacked up for it. I think most of your watchers, most of your viewers could pick which group is which. But if we take a look at what the Legislative Analyst's Office says, businesses would be allowed to pick between and switch back and forth between 2 different formulas for determining how much tax to pay. So they're trying to soften the blow of taking away some credits by saying, we're going to give you 2 different formulas, and you can pick the one that benefits your corporation the most that year. And you can switch it the following year, so you're not locked in. So there's a softening of the blow of losing these shifting tax credits. State revenues, they believe the Legislative Analyst's Office, and normally they're pretty conservative. I don't mean politically. I mean they're conservative fiscally. They say that the state revenues would increase by $1.3 billion. So basically, there would be an additional tax of $1.3 billion on California corporations. The people who argue in favor of this say it's okay because it really only impacts the largest 2% of California businesses. So it's kind of that big business bad, it's okay to tax, like taxing the rich. It's a similar philosophy that some people have. And they'll argue that these are unfair tax loopholes. that only benefit large corporations that have multiple divisions and multiple corporations under their umbrella, and it does it at the expense of state-funded programs, primarily education. So that's kind of the ones who want to say, we really absolutely need this money. We have a $20 billion deficit. We need the money. We can't afford to give away tax credits and loopholes to large profitable corporations. Those who are against it will argue it's going to impact 120,000 businesses in the state of California, not just the largest 2%, and it will cost California 144,000 jobs. The theory being that if you keep the $1.3 billion in the corporations, some of that will be used to hire people. Those who argue in favor of Prop 24 will say, no, all that money just goes to the bottom line, to the board of directors, the shareholders, and the top executives. That's a battle that we're never going to win. But those are the two sides that are going against it.
And what about the philosophy that if we're not friendly to corporations, that not only will others not join us, but some may leave us? Is that factored in at all? I didn't hear that in your figures.
Well, it's not factored necessarily into the figures. There are a lot of corporations that are leaving California. And the sad part is, you'll hear a lot of people say, well, that's okay, we want the losers to leave anyway. It's not the companies that are on the brink that are leaving because they can't afford to leave. The only companies that can afford to leave California are successful companies.
The large profitable
The large profitable companies. And what a lot of companies are doing is they're not necessarily leaving California, but they're opening their new divisions into other states. So they're opening those divisions in Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, Texas, which are spending a tremendous amount of money poaching California businesses. So again, this kind of comes along. I'll tell you who's for it and who's against it.
Please.
These are all the public declarations they've made. VICITA, our local economic development association here in Ventura County, is against it, as is the California Chamber, as is the California Manufacturers and Technology Association, as is the GOP, the Republican Party, and of the 18 major newspapers in the state of California, 14 of them are against it, 4 of them are in favor of it. So not surprisingly, the Republicans and the business groups are lining up against this because they think it hurts businesses. The unions, the 8 major unions in the state of California are unanimously for it. That's what they want to have happen. They want the money to go back into the state because an awful lot of the state money drifts back down into unions, California teachers, the prison guards and whatnot, so we're good there. Democrats also support this as a party. Meg Whitman is no. She's lined up with the Republican Party on this. Libertarians are no. And Attorney General Brown, gubernatorial candidate Brown, and I'm not allowed to say that he's afraid, but gubernatorial candidate Brown has chosen not to take a position on Prop 24. So you can read into that whatever nonpartisan view you would like.
Which you shared last week, but why don't you remind folks, if they're new to the program, about the gubernatorial candidates and how they're weighing in?
There are 9 statewide propositions this year on the ballot. Meg Whitman has taken a position on all 9 of them. Jerry Brown has taken a position only on 2, on Prop 19 and Prop 23. The other 7 he has chosen not to take a position on.
So is that considered abstaining?
I would think so.
Or recusing?
I believe I referred to it as a lack of courage, but I was rebuffed, so I guess we could call it abstaining. Quite candidly, I would like to see our leaders take positions on controversial issues. You look to them for guidance,
yes,
in theory, so I'm concerned. Now there are, in fairness, the Democratic Party didn't take a position on 1 or 2 of the propositions, and that'll come up today, and the Republican Party did not take a position on 1 or 2. So there are certain
But that's the exception.
Those are the exception. With Jerry Brown, it's the rule.
Right.
He passed on 7 of the 9. And you kind of have to wonder, I think it's a fair thing for the people of California, regardless of whether you support or not Jerry Brown, it's a reasonable thing to say, wait, where do you stand on these issues? We have to vote on them on Tuesday. And while our votes get to be private, his doesn't. And nor does Meg Whitman's, nor does anybody running for statewide office, because they're supposed to be leading us on these views, in my opinion. So I would be curious where Jerry Brown fell on this. The odds are pretty good that he would be a yes on this. The unions are, and the Democratic Party is, and so it's a pretty reasonable expectation that he would be as well.
And Scott, last week you mentioned one of your sources in particular that you've got your information from. It's a website.
Yes, I will do that. It is CaliforniaChoices.org. Fantastic website. If you get a chance, go take a peek. It shows where a lot of this information comes from. Shows where the unions stand, where 18 major newspapers stand, where about 20 different nonprofit and advocacy groups stand, where each of the half dozen or so political parties that show up on the ballot stand, and where both gubernatorial candidates stand. So it's a great way to go. I mean, if you feel very strongly aligned with unions in the Democratic Party and Jerry Brown, you can see that they're very consistent in what they support and what they don't. And the same thing, if you find that you're more a supporter of businesses and the Republican Party and Meg Whitman, you'll find that they're pretty much in concert on their votes as well.
Okay, and that's our coverage of Prop 24. When we come back, we are going to devote a segment each to 25, 26, and then we're going to jump back to 23. So stay tuned. You're watching the Maria Sanchez Show on KADYTV.com.